Sometimes the problem is not that you're doing nothing, it is that you never stop. Your days are full, your mind is always on. Even when you rest, you're still thinking about what needs to be done next, what you did not finish, what is coming tomorrow. And over time, that does something to you. You start to measure your life by what you produce, by how much you get done, by how useful you feel. And without realizing it, your value starts to get tied to your output. If you're productive, you feel good about yourself. If you're not, you feel behind. You feel like you're wasting time, and this is not something you choose on purpose. It is something that you learn by living in a world that rewards constant productivity. And this is where something important happens. You can believe in God, you can even follow Him, but still live like everything depends on you. You keep going, you keep pushing, you keep trying to stay on top of everything, and eventually you get tired. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And the hard part is, you do not always know how to stop without feeling guilty. Because stopping feels like falling behind. Rest feels unproductive. And if your worth is tied to what you produce, then rest feels like a risk. And this is exactly where God speaks in a way that feels almost opposite to everything you have learned. Not by asking you to do more, but asking you to stop. In Genesis 2, says that by the seventh day, God completed His work, which He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work, which He had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. God did not just create the idea of rest. He marked a specific day, the seventh day. That matters because in Scripture, the seventh day is not left undefined. When you follow the biblical account from creation to the commandments, the seventh day is a day we call now Saturday. In Exodus 28 through 10, God says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. God did not say one day out of seven. He pointed to a specific day, a day He blessed, a day He set apart. God rested, not because He was tired, but because He was setting a pattern, a rhythm, a way of living. And this matters. The Sabbath did not begin at Sinai. It was already given at creation. Before it was ever spoken as a command, it was experienced as a gift. God built rest into the structure of life itself, which means this is not just about taking a break. This is about how you were created to live. And then later, when God gives the Sabbath as a command in Exodus 20, He is not introducing something new. He is restoring something that was already there, something that was lost in the way we started living. And this is where we need to pause and ask an honest question. Why is it so hard to stop? Because if rest is good, if rest is part of how we were created, then why does it feel uncomfortable? For many people, the struggle is not lack of time. It is what rest forces you to face. When you stop working, you're left with yourself. No distractions, no productivity to hide behind, no sense of accomplishment to hold on to, just you. And sometimes that feels uncomfortable because you start to notice things you were too busy to see. Your thoughts, your emotions, your spiritual life. And instead of leaning into that, it's easier to stay busy. But there's something even deeper happening. When you refuse to stop, you're not just avoiding rest. You're slowly starting to believe that everything depends on you. That your life moves forward because of your effort. That things fall apart if you step away. That your value comes from what you do. And that belief will wear you out. Because you were never meant to carry that kind of weight. For other people, it is not just about being busy. It's about tradition. They have grown up keeping a different day or no day at all. And when they see what Scripture says, there can be a resistance, not because it is unclear, but because it is uncomfortable to change, because it means choosing scripture over what is familiar. And this is where we need to be honest. Sometimes the struggle is not confusion, it is pride. It is choosing what feels easier over what God has clearly said. But if our relationship with God is built on trust, then our loyalty has to be His word, not just what we have always done. This is where the Sabbath becomes more than a day. It becomes a statement. Every time you stop, you're saying something with your life. You're saying something. God is still in control even when I'm not working. You're saying my life is sustained by Him, not by my constant effort. You're saying I am more than what I produce. And that is why this is not just physical rest, this is spiritual. In Mark 2:27, Jesus says, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. And this is important because over time, people have added things to the Sabbath that God never said. Rules, restrictions, extra expectations, turning something that was meant to bring rest into something that feels heavy. Even in Jesus' time, this was happening already. The Sabbath had become more about what you could not do than about what God wanted to give. And Jesus pushes back against that. Not to remove the Sabbath, but to restore it. To bring it back to what it was meant to be, a gift, not a burden. In other words, the Sabbath was created for your good. Not as a test, but as a gift. And this is where many people misunderstand it. Because when you hear the word command, it is easy to assume pressure, obligation, something you have to do to stay right with God. But the Sabbath is different. God is not asking you to prove something. He's inviting you to receive something. And that changes how you approach it. Because if you see the Sabbath as a rule, you will try to manage it. You will ask, what can I do? What can I not do? Where is that line? But if you see it as a gift, you will start asking a different question. How do I enter into this? How do I actually rest? How do I experience what God intended? The Sabbath is not just about stopping. It is also about celebrating. When God connects the Sabbath to creation in Exodus 20, He's reminding you of something. You are not an accident. Your life has meaning because it comes from Him. Every Sabbath is a weekly reminder of where you come from. That you were created on purpose. That your life is not random. It is a celebration of creation. And that changes how you rest. Because you're not just stepping away from work. You're stepping into remembrance. Remembering who God is. Remembering what He has done. Remembering who you are because of Him. And this is where it connects directly to identity. Because the Sabbath interrupts the lie that your worth is based on your performance. For 6 days you work, you build, you produce, you create. That is part of life. But on the 7th day, you stop. Not because everything is done, but because you are not defined by what is unfinished. You are defined but by the one who created you. And that is a shift most people never fully experience. Because we live in a culture that constantly tells us to keep going, do more, be more, achieve more. And even when you reach a goal, it's not enough. There is always something else. So you keep running. And over time, you forget how to just be. And this is where the Sabbath calls you back. Back to presence, back to relationship, back to remembering who you are. Not what you do, who you are. This is also where the Sabbath protects something in your life. It protects your identity from being shaped by pressure. It protects your mind from constant noise. It protects your relationship with God from becoming distant. Because when you're always moving, it is hard to listen. When you're always producing, it is hard to receive. And the Sabbath creates a space for that, a space to slow down, a space to reflect, a space to reconnect, not just with God, but with what is actually happening inside of you. This is where it becomes very practical, because the Sabbath is not just about stopping work. It is about shifting your focus. It is about choosing to be present with God in a way that you do not do the rest of the week. That can look different for different people, but the purpose is the same: to rest, to remember, to reconnect, to realign. And this is important to say. You will not do this perfectly. At first, it might feel unfamiliar. You might feel restless. You might not know what to do with your time. And that is okay, because this is not about getting it right. It's about learning a different rhythm. One where your life is not driven by constant pressure, but shaped by trust. Trust that God is enough. Trust that your value is secure. Trust that you do not have to carry everything on your own. The Sabbath connects to everything we've been talking about. God created you with purpose. Something broke. Jesus made a way to restore what was broken. And now God shows you how to live inside that restored relationship. Not by pushing you harder, but by teaching you how to rest in Him. Many people miss it because they think spiritual growth is always about doing more prayer, more reading, more effort. But sometimes spiritual growth looks like stopping, letting God meet you where you are, letting Him remind you of what is true, letting Him carry what you have been trying to carry alone. And that's not weakness, that is trust. And maybe that's where you need to pause and ask yourself something honest. When was the last time you truly rested? Not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. When was the last time you stopped trying to prove something? When was the last time you allowed yourself to be with God without rushing through it? Because if that has been missing, this is not something you fix by trying harder. This is something you step into it. One day, one decision, one rhythm at a time. And here's what you need to hear clearly. God is not asking you to stop because He needs it. He's asking you to stop because you need it. Because He knows what happens when you do not. He knows how quickly your identity gets tied to performance. He knows how easily your mind gets overwhelmed. He knows how distant your relationship with Him can feel when you're always busy. And He cares about that. So He gave you a day, not to take something from you, but to give something back to you. Rest, clarity, presence, connection. Next week, we're going to talk about something that many people avoid: what happens after we die. Because even that connects to rest, to trust, to understanding who God is. But before we go there, stay with this. You are more than what you produce. Your value is not measured by your output. And you do not have to keep running to prove something that God has already given to you. If you're watching this on YouTube and you wanted to be part of this live where we can actually talk and not just listen, check the description below. You will find the information there on how to join us live every week. Be part of the conversation, not just watch it. See you next week. And for those that are here live, let's talk.
Hello, hello. Welcome back. I am so glad. I believe we fixed the link problem. Everything is different today. I'm in a hotel room. Hopefully, the internet is stable enough to live stream on YouTube. But we're here. We're good. Yes. Um, okay, so now I am going to share with you the poll. And where are you? Here it is. Like always, I have to share. Then I have to end, allow the panelists to participate, and then share again. Here we go. So I'm going to give you guys some time to fill this up by yourselves without talking. I was told last week that it's nice to have silence so you guys can focus. But for those that are joining for the first time, just wanted to let you know the poll gives us an idea of where everybody stands. So that's why it's important for everybody to participate. So I'm going to ask you to please participate in the poll. And yes, so I am going to give you about 3 to 4 minutes. As I see that it starts to slow down, then I'll put a stop. So please go start answering the poll. Thank you. Ignore number 10. It's probably one of those things that when I was copying and paste, it didn't go through. I'm just testing you to make sure you're paying attention. Whoa, first time we have 100% participation. So maybe the secret is that I have to shut up so you guys can focus. That's the secret. You know how hard it is for me to be silent. I almost start singing here. Ah, this is too funny. I'm opening the results. Okay, so panelists, please turn on your cameras. Welcome, everyone. Ah, this is too funny. I loved it. So, I think everybody knows each other now, but for the people online, we need to make sure we introduce yourselves again. We're gonna ask, we're gonna say your name, where you are, and if you had a chance to have dinner with a Bible character, who would it be? And short answer, why? Xavier, where are you? So let's start with Marcus.
Hello there, my name is Marcos. I am from a little town in North Carolina called Rockingham. And I feel like the obvious choice to your question is obviously Jesus. We want to sit and talk to Jesus, but um, ultimately we'll get that chance. Um, I'm gonna go with like a weird choice. There's a judge called Shamgar. He literally shows up for like two verses. He killed 300 Philistines with a stick. I want to talk to the guy. I need some tips.
Leave it to Marcus to find people that we never heard of it. Isaac,
Hello, I'm Isaac. I'm here in Hampton, Virginia. Uh, Bible character, probably Adam. I could hear about the first Sabbath, hear about, what it was like before the fall, all that good stuff.
awesome. Jacob,
I am Jacob. I'm from West Columbia, South Carolina, almost the center of the state. And as far as a biblical figure, I think I'd want to sit and talk with Paul
mm,
because he's written so many books in the New Testament, and I've heard various things about Paul, and both good and bad, but it's all up for interpretation. And kind of want to hear from the horse's mouth itself. What's right, or what's truthful, or what's hearsay.
very good. Xavier,
I feel like I differ from my fellow panelists because I immediately was thinking like who was throwing down some good food that's recorded in scripture. So I would say Jacob. Wow, I can't speak. I would say Jacob because he made a stew that Esau sold his birthright for. So I feel like that's some pretty good lentil stew. Yeah. Oh, yeah. My name's Xavier and I'm in Orlando. Yeah.
there you go. Okay, different categories of the reasons why. I think I would definitely, there are so many people that I want to sit down with, but definitely Paul would be my guy. Look in his eyes, and I was like, Paul, do you know how much trouble I got into because of you? Paul is my guy. Paul is my guy. I'm trying to see here. I don't think I missed anything on the chat. Yes, we're talking to each other. So that's good. I like that. I like that very much. So I think today, um, this is a topic that is very familiar to most of the people that are here. I would be curious to see if anybody in the chat, if the idea of the 7 day Sabbath is brand new to you. If it is, please put in the chat because I wanted to know that. But for the others, I wanted to start with a question. So I know that everybody in the panel here understand the 7 day Sabbath. But what I want to know from you guys is how were you taught about the Sabbath? Did you see the Sabbath as a rule, like I mentioned in the sermon, or were you taught like a day of joy, celebration? Let me see here. Jacob, let's start with you.
So I had been growing up as a Seventh Day Adventist in my youth, and then we stopped going to church for many years, and then trying to pick back up. Blah blah blah. But getting back into it, was my interpretation that the Sabbath was essentially a day to worship the Lord over Sunday
Mm-hmm.
because it's blatantly said in the Bible. Um, and I never really took up like resting on that day, but my mom has adopted to take religious Saturdays off, or it's like to be off for religious reasons. I was like, that's interesting. And I have another coworker that does it as well, same job. But I guess seeping into further discussion, we get so we get so caught up with the material world, and we feel like we need material things, specifically money, and that's why we focus so much on working on Saturdays or trying to get and some extra money in the check. And rather than resting, we take up that date for working. Because I worked this morning and I was like, "Ugh, this day sucks."
Yeah, yeah. But was more of a burden for you or a joy? The idea of the fourth commandment.
um, I never had really considered it
Okay.
because you can learn through routine, or you can be how to word it, know through routine, but still not be able to understand it.
Yep, yep, you're right. Xavier, we have not even talking about which day is right, Saturday or Sunday. Just think of a day of rest. Why do you feel, which I did mention few different things in a sermon, but your perspective, the people that you know, if you have ever introduced the concept of the Sabbath to somebody, why do you think it's so hard for people to accept the Sabbath, a Sabbath even?
I actually think in more recent years, a lot more people have been open and like
Mm,
finding a need for it. I forget if it's the book. I swear I can speak English and I'm making up words. I swear the book, The Relentless. Oh man, I'm gonna butcher the title. It's like something about relentless and hurry. It was a big book like about 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm pretty sure that author kind of like for a lot of people that was their first like introduction to this concept of a Sabbath. Um and I remember like I did public education all through college. So I didn't have for those of you who have like the blessing to do Adventist education, like it's definitely a blessing to have your academic side like have your Sabbath built into it. Because like if you're in the public sector, there are going to be conflicts and there are workarounds and stuff. And but I remember in college, like the first finals week, we were all like losing our minds, like studying for our chem final. And like Friday night came along, and I was like, well, that's as much as I'm getting done. Uh, for now, I'll study Saturday night again and Sunday again. And then my other friend who was like frantic was like, how can you afford to take time off from studying? And I was like, how can you afford not to? You're going to drive yourself crazy and burn out if you just keep going at the pace that we've been going like today. Um, so I think, and then just like ever since then you get to be adulting. What a fun time that is. And like feel some real pressure. And at like the end of the work week, you're like, whoa. And if you don't have a day of rest, it just becomes your weekends can easily become just errand days. And I'm gonna stir the pot a little bit here. I would even venture to say there are some lifelong Seventh-day Adventists who are terrible at keeping the Sabbath because they have filled it to the brim with so much church activity that it's good activity, but when any activity separates you from intimacy with God, it becomes an idol. So
That's all I'll say about that for now.
I was at a church where they had the best food for potluck. But potluck was such a big deal, which I love potluck. And I honestly believe that we should have potluck every Sabbath and every church. And they would cook everything from scratch. Instead of everybody bring the food, they would cook it at the church. Instead of a bunch of different foods, it was like a menu. No, they really took it serious. The problem is there were 10 women in the kitchen that would miss the entire worship service cooking. So it's like it's wonderful, but you also miss the privilege of worshiping God together, you know? So sometimes we go a little like we don't do this, but then we do something else that takes us away from God, you know? So I like that. Uh Logan say, I would agree, Xavier. I would also add 6 days thou shalt labor. Yeah, that's the other thing. We are like, keep the 7 day Sabbath, but we forget the 6 other days that we're supposed to be working. Ah, but come on, we need more work. Yeah. I like the 2 days rest. But I don't think we got into this yet. Marcus, why do you think people fight so much against the rest? Even though some people are more going more towards it now, I think people are more self-aware of self-care and all of that, and people are going towards it. But they still fighting. Marcus.
Well, at least culturally, and I speak this from personal experience, it's just the things that I've heard at my job, right? Anybody that doesn't work to the degree that, whether it be my employers or my coworkers, anybody that doesn't work at the degree that they understand is proper is immediately branded as lazy.
Mm.
So when you live in a culture that has thrown that away, that, God gave us that day of rest, but he's not really part of the culture. Taking a day of rest is seen as lazy. And for many people that I know that have had to at their jobs ask for like a day of rest for religious reasons or anything like that, like they have to find some way to make up for that just to prove that they're not lazy, even to this day. Um, so I think that is the main struggle. It just never feels like we're doing enough. We live in the grind culture where you're supposed to disappear and disconnect from everything and everyone to chase your bag, right? So whenever you bring up the concept of a whole 24 hours of sitting on your butt, which obviously that's not exactly what God has in mind when he says rest. Um, but that's the way many people misunderstand it. As soon as you say rest or a Sabbath or taking a break, whatever word you may use for it, like people are immediately, oh, you're gonna be on your butt doing nothing. You're being lazy. And or you're just not doing enough. It's like, yeah, you can take whatever days of rest you want, but that time that you're taking, like you could be using it productively. You're not being productive. And we're so afraid of all this time that I threw away by resting.
Yep, I can see that. And in different cultures are a little easier or worse. Like this idea of some people will even say, oh, I keep the Sabbath whichever day that they decide to keep, but they don't really keep the whole day. And it's the rest is a great component where God says, in 6 days you shall do all your work, but on the Sabbath day, you keep it holy. So it's rest plus holy. And it's also we're gonna get I wanted to get into that in a little bit, but it's a holy day, a holiday in memory of creation. Isaac, now let's go into, okay, I think we have some ideas of why for some people it's so difficult. And I agree with everything that has been said here, to just rest. Now, resting and keeping the 7 day Sabbath, why do you think people fight so much against that?
Well, giving a specific day or time or anything to anyone just grates on people's nerves. If you tell someone to do anything, even if they're already doing it, uh, they just get upset. So I think that's one thing, you know, being told to do something and not wanting to do it. The other is people have usually already made plans for that day. So if they're going into it making or having to conflict with already made plans, something they've lived maybe, years, decades with, that's really difficult. That's difficult to pull away from. Plus, there's just so many things you can fill the day with. So many things that people could do. It feels like they're wasting a day. And nowadays, with the go, 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 we don't want to waste any time. So, yeah, I think people just really need to have that time and not be told what to do. So it's like a matter of self-discipline at that point where you got to just make that decision yourself to do it. You can't be told to do it.
There's so much that it involves. I was, by the way, folks, last week I remembered that, and I just remember now. If you have questions, you can ask me or us, and you in the chat. You can put it in the chat or in the Q&A if you want a private. But yes, there's so many other things involved. But I am giving the Bible study to this girl. She was raised evangelical, different churches throughout her life, but Christian evangelicalism and things like that. And a little bit people are raised already. It depends on where you are. Brazilians, we're very confrontational. So she's being warned against the 7 day keepers that are will try to brainwash you. And at some point of the conversation, I was like, okay, so the law was carved on the cross. Is this something common here in the US? Because it's very common in Brazil that they say we don't have to keep the old covenant, only the new covenant, because the law was not carved. Is it carved?
Nailed to the cross.
Nailed to the cross. And I was like, okay, I understand what they mean. And some laws were nailed to the cross. We talked about that last week. Now I'm getting all confused because I'm doing 3 Bible studies and the online church, and the topics are almost like all of the same. In the same week, I'm touching the same topic. So now I'm like, did I tell this to the online church, the Bible studies? Who did I talk to? But the lack of understanding the separation between the moral law, the ceremonial law, health laws. So yes, there were part of the laws that were nailed in the cross on the cross. But and she goes, well, but then how are we gonna know? I was like, well, let's look at the moral law, the 10 Commandments. Is it okay to worship other gods? No. Is it okay to have statues, worship them? No. Is it okay to take God's name in vain? No. Can you dishonor your parents? No. Kill? No. Steal? No. Gossip? No. So the only one that was nailed in the cross was the Sabbath. And she was, oh, I never thought of that. So there's a lot of inconsistencies when we start talking about that. And I believe, honestly, it's sometimes, not always, it's a case of pride. Like I play around because I was Catholic and I used to say that to, it didn't last long. Then I became atheist, but I used to hear my whole family was like, I'm Catholic and I'm going to die Catholic. They say that like a football team, like why do you like that football team? I just like them. I was born there. And they don't really understand why. Guys, I love all of the conversation that is happening here in the chat. I'm just not able to keep up. You guys are so good. Keep talking. If there's something special you guys want me to mention here, just tell me what it is. This is really good. Let me see here. I like what Marco said about if you are not working, you looked at as lazy. Jacob, how do you feel like the pressure of productivity affects even your decision about the Sabbath?
Um, could you ask that again?
The pressure, the societal pressure that we have to be productive. How does that affect you as far as choosing to keep the Sabbath? Like keeping a job or losing the job and that kind of thing.
I guess it's just the overhanging consequences of not acting, or I guess the anxiety of the anticipation of what may come next, or what happens if I don't finish XYZ ABC before then. So your mind is muddled with it gets filled up with a list of things to do that you feel that you must do before a certain time, and then you just forget to put rest into it.
Did anybody here had a situation that you might lose a job because you want to keep the Sabbath? You guys never? Nobody? Okay, let me catch on a little bit at least. Go ahead, Marcus.
Now, I was just gonna mention, in my case, I haven't been about to lose it. I just thought I wasn't gonna get it. Because that for me is like, for me, the Sabbath is something very personal for me. I don't play about that. For me, if I feel convicted about something that the Word of God says, I at least want to do my best to try to live by it, right? So whenever I'm going into a job, that's like my first disclaimer. Okay, so listen, buddy, I will work 6 days out of the week. You need me here Sunday, I'll be here Sunday, but I'm not gonna be here, one day out of the week. It's not non-negotiable. And most of the time, if I'm completely honest, every time I'm starting a new job, my expectation is they're gonna make it a whole big deal. But up to this point, they're like, I still remember the first time I was working, I was starting a job outside of like people that I already knew. And, I put that thing first, and I'm like, I'm not gonna get the job, it's whatever. I should probably just walk out the door. And the guy's like, oh yeah, I don't care. Just talk to your coworker as long as y'all can work the thing out. As long as there's somebody here, I don't care. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she was really cool about it.
I think
Many,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think the way that society is right now, with a lot of business open 7 days a week, they need to make the schedule flexible. So there is ways of doing that. The problem is when the business is open 5 days a week plus Saturday morning, or like that time, like when I was in the bank, um, they opened for only half a day on Saturdays. Not a single one of the employees wanted to work that day. So, and I come to say I want the Sabbath off because now I am going to church. Now I have a religious reason. That is when things got ugly because all of the other employees are very upset. Why do we have to do it? She doesn't do it, you know? Let me catch up with a little bit at least of the chat here. Rebecca was answering the question that the old versus the new covenant is a hot and popular issue down here in the southern states. Okay, so it is just like in Brazil. James is saying that she heard that Sabbath is for the Jews. Are you keeping Moses' law or Jesus' law? Nailed on the cross is what I get from others. Yes, and this is what we were talking about before. Moses or Jesus. And when people that don't know how to make the separation, Moses' law were all of the ceremonial laws. And if I did mention this last week, I'm going to mention it again. So when they spent the 40 years in the desert, God gave them a object lessons that they lived. This was not an interpretation, theatrical, to learn a lesson, but they lived that lesson. The object lesson was all of the ritual in the tabernacle. So when we talked about a little bit of the tabernacle, that we talked about it here, each part of the ritual of the tabernacle was showing, pointing to something in the future. And all of those, everything related to the tabernacle, the sacrificial, the killing of the animal, the what they went inside, and the spreading of the blood when people confessed, and then the cleansing of the tabernacle, all of that were part of the ceremonial law. That was nailed in the cross. That is 100% correct. That is the Moses law, and that never went into the Ark of the Covenant. It was put to the side of the Ark of the Covenant. So there is a difference between the Ten Commandments, the moral law, and the ceremonial laws, also known as Moses' law. And we need to understand those because it does become complicated. Xavier is saying the ceremonial law of the sacrifice was nailed in the cross, but Paul himself reiterates the Ten Commandments as still needing to be followed. Yeah, another conversation with Paul that we're going to have. Paul, you're wonderful. Paul wrote like the lawyers write today. When you read Paul, it's a little confusing for us. You know, at one point he's like, grace, 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 and defending grace. Why was he doing that? He was talking to Sadducees and Pharisees, people that were living to the T of the law. He knew his audience, and he needed for them to understand that you're not saved by keeping the law. You're saved by the grace of Christ. But what do we do then? We ignore the law, we put away the law, and he says, no. But because you are saved, you wanted to keep the law. And then Logan, is it possible to rest to a fault? Example, immediately after church, we go home and don't engage in fellowship. There's so much we can talk about this. Yes, yes, yes. You know, the commandment says, I love that. The commandment says, you shall work 6 days, and on the seventh day, you shall not do any work. What is God saying? You're going to stop with let's say you work in the business and you're not going to do that work, but you should keep the 7th day holy. He didn't say sleep the whole day. Also, it's not a sin to sleep on the Sabbath. It's like, it's a day to keep it holy, it's a day to come together to be with God. A lot of the Brazilians, you know, they are very confrontational. They talk and all of that. They're like, you 7-day Adventists, what do? You sit on a chair and you look at the ceiling the whole day. Well, they have this idea because we have acted crazy sometimes, you know, like, so I can't blame them. But if we had shown them the joy that it is to come with family, the church family, and celebrate the Sabbath, you know, to its fullness. It's a day to help people. It's a day to rest sometimes, but to help and to worship God. We wouldn't have these crazy ideas. And then Marcos replied, anything done out of the wrong motive, even the right thing will be at fault. Yes, I agree. I personally think that you may have moments when you need to disconnect from people seeking to connect to God. I got lost. Where did I go? From seeking to connect with God, but complete disconnect from your community under the guise of rest. Sometimes it's just like, oh, I keep the Sabbath. No, I spend every single Saturday sleeping in my house. You're giving excuses. Or how about those people that only says to the employer that they are Seventh Adventist just so they don't have to work on the Sabbath? But everything else, they're definitely not Seventh Adventist. Okay, Xavier.
Two things. So just going off of that point, I knew somebody who knew somebody when we were doing the SATs. That sounded like the beginning of a joke. I knew somebody who knew somebody. It's legit. When we were taking the SATs, they were like, "Oh, suddenly Adventist," and they weren't. And then it followed the for the rest of the because it was just like I forget why that specific one they didn't want it. They wanted to do it on Sunday, but then like they went to like register. I guess they needed to take it again or ACT or something. And then the people were like, "But I thought you were a burr," and it was like, so yeah, that was just a fun way that I can bite you in the butt. Um, the other thing that I was gonna say, it kind of came up in the chat earlier about the Sabbath for a lot of people outside, like when they hear about like this day of rest and like, oh, we separate ourselves from the world and we run into our churches and then we run home and we lock the door. And it's like, okay, so it does sound like very like isolating and like what's happening there? For me, as a visual artist, like a lot of my ministry happens during Sabbath. And like this might be like controversial. And this is like one thing that like I have like had conversations with God about this because I remember when I first started my studio art business, um like I got an invitation to show at a festival, an art festival. And most art festivals span the entire weekend. And there's not really a thing where you're like, can I not show up Saturday but be there like Sunday? And so I'm asking God, I'm like, God, like, why would you, why would you do this to me? Give me this invitation, and then I get, and the claps because sometimes God answers gently, and other times He claps back, and the clap back that I got from God was, Zave, do you see anybody doing visual art ministry out here? Like, is anybody like, do you see like having conversations that like point back towards me? Not to say that there aren't people having them, but no, it wasn't like readily apparent. I was like, no, I don't see that. So he's like, so are you just going to be keeping a pew warm? Or are you gonna like get out uncomfortable with what your peers might say is not Sabbath keeping and be here? And that was like a difficult, I was like terrified. I was like, and I remember even like going to like ask my pastor at the time about, I was like, hey, even though, the big man upstairs told me, I still like kind of like low key want your almost sign off as a human on that I can do this on the Sabbath. Like that, I'm just being that real. And they were like, if you're doing his work, that's like Jesus himself was like scolding the Pharisees who were like, is it wrong for me to heal on the Sabbath? Is it wrong for me to extend the love of God? And of course, you can get into all sorts of like gray areas where then people like take advantage of the grace of God and try to justify wilding out. So this is where having a personal connection with Christ is of great import. Because if you're walking closely with him, you're not going to want to um engage, I guess, in like behaviors or habits that like hurt him or like go against what he's about. And it's been really interesting. I don't do the festivals as much anymore, but when I was doing them, something that I noticed, and it was like, okay, God is providing in a very unique way here. Saturdays would be the conversation heavy days. So I would, because all my artwork is like inspired by scripture. So it's all literal like Bible animals and plants. And so people would like want to have conversations that like went deeper on Saturdays. And I'd be like, well, if I don't make a single, like sales weren't important. It's like the profit is more important than a profit. So I was glad to have those conversations. But then on Sunday, I always broke even for the space fee to be there. So it was kind of like God, like he's like, I see like how like other Adventists may like be like, "Yeah, sure." That's the sound of collective angst in the Adventist church. And I was like, all right, Lord, then I'll keep showing up as long as like you are, leading me to these places. So
Yeah, that is always like if we get into like how to properly keep the Sabbath. There's a lot of questions that we can ask. One of the things that I always wanted to do when I actually had a physical church, I wanted to do ministry outside of the walls of the church. And one thing that I wanted to do was actually go to a market and rent a space, set up a booth, and be able to give out information or even sell something. But on the Sabbath, I wouldn't sell, but I would still be there and still give the information and still do what we had to do, except that I would not sell that day. But those are the things that you have to sit down with God and understand, God, what do you want me to do? But I think the idea of doing ministry outside of the walls of the church is that important. I think we need to get more into that. If there's, I mean, that I think is the number one thing that we need to start focusing, because we are just sitting at the church and waiting people to come, and God wants us to go, to go out. Marcus.
You mentioning that actually just well sparked the fact that we actually do that at my church, right? We
That's
have
awesome.
a flea market here in town, and we have a booth that we have rented. And that is, we have a specific person that is their ministry. That's what they go do. Every Saturday, early in the morning, because our flea market is only open on Saturdays. So they're there.
Mm.
Like, we're not selling anything, but we're giving away literature, just talking to people, and many times we have him come and we have a moment in the service. It's like 10 minutes just speaking about outreach, and they get to share like a lot of the stories of people that they run into in that ministry. And it's honestly mind-blowing because it's people that you may end up seeing come to church, but they came through that. And there's also
Mm.
people that you'll never see at the church,
And I
ever.
think you need to have something, because if you're in a flea market and you just have literature to pass out, majority of people are going to pass by and they're going to know this is a religious thing and they're not going to care for that. But if you have Xavier doing his painting, right, that is attractive. So having that kind of different style of ministry, I think is fantastic.
well,
you
and
know
like a lot of times, like the folks I engage with, like they'll say something to the effect of like, I either have had a significant like religious trauma in my life or like had abuse or I have problems with organized religion. I don't have a problem with God. Like I hear a lot of that. And so they're like, there's no way like right now in my life that I'm intentionally going to go into a church. But a lot of Adventist churches are kind of operating, I'm not saying all of them, but there's this kind of default setting of like, if they want to level up their God relationship, they better come in our walls. And it's like not, whereas like Christ himself was all most of his life. I mean, yes, he pops up in a synagogue here and there, and then basically calls himself the Messiah and gets himself kicked out. That's a whole nother thing. But most of the time he's out there like seeking like what are people's like practical pain points, because once you put a salve on the pain, people's bandwidth to like entertain the possibility of a new worldview is that much greater. But if they are still like the woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years, like still have a very practical problem, they are not going to be able to take on your theological compassion upon them.
I read here quickly Isaac's comment, and it's true. We do separate ourselves, and we have to be careful, because that's exactly what the Jews did. When God called Abraham and from him said, I'm going to make a great nation, within time, I'm sure it wasn't from the beginning, but with time, They misunderstood what God was calling them to. They felt like there's the exclusive, only they were the people of God, and they didn't understand that God called them to evangelize the world. But they thought, no, if you're not descendant of Abraham, that's it, you're not going to have salvation. And we run the risk of doing the same thing. I do believe that we have a special message. Like I love history, and when you look at the history of Christianity and how paganism started coming into Christianity, and then we see the reform and we see God calling us out of the darkness and start giving. And I do believe that the message, that the most recent messages that we received, which for us was the Sabbath, what really happens after death, hell, and the spirit, all of those messages that kind of add on to everything else that Christianity had already, the Protestantism had already discovered, and adding on, I do believe we have a special message. I do believe that we have a message that is the present truth. The problem is we are becoming too absorbed with the truth that we have, that we're doing similar to what they did back in the time of Jesus. They better come to us. And even when we do go out, the strategies that we're using to reach people are strategies that worked like 30 years ago or more. Because today what it works is developing relationships, just passing out information. I'm sorry if anybody that is a co-port is listening to me, they're gonna hate me right now, but it's very hard for people to fully give themselves to God when there is no relationship. Marcus, you are muted.
Thank you. When it comes to creating relationships and the importance of that, like we see Jesus' entire ministry was that. Like we love to focus on, oh, he'd go somewhere and he'd speak at one moment. Like, yes, the Sermon on the Mount was people spending an entire day with a person, getting to know them. These people would follow Jesus around. The people who were truly transformed, it wasn't just the people that heard his sermon one time. It was the disciples who were walking with him, right, on a daily basis. And beyond the 12, we know that there was 120, and then we know there was a whole bunch more. And think about the people that were healed by him, which just decided to follow him because I didn't have a life before you. You've literally given me life. I'm walking with you. It's a day-to-day thing. And that's part of the issue in churches today, in our churches, in my church. I'm going to speak for myself. True discipleship is so time consuming because it's not I just show up to your house one day, and I'm guilty of this. I show up to your house, one day a week, maybe one day a month, uh, to just read through a pamphlet of a prepared Bible study and expect that, but by the end of like God knows how many lessons that we read of this pamphlet, then you will make the decision to come into the church and sit every Saturday to hear sermons. That's not what Jesus said. That's not what Jesus did. What he did was go out there and live. He lived and let people live with him. And that's discipleship, and that's time consuming. That's energy consuming. And you don't really get a break.
Marcos, you took the words out of my mouth. There is one sermon that I do when I have chance, is exactly about discipleship, because it's a frustration of mine. We talk so much about discipleship. We have books on discipleship. We have training on discipleship, and we don't see real discipleship happening. What's wrong? Because the resources are there, the emphasis is there. The what happens is we think that discipleship is a coaching training section, and that's not what it is. Jesus is, he ate with them, he slept with them, they spent time with them, they let him see him living every day. So it's a completely different ball game than what we understand today. And this is This is what God is calling us to do. Today, one of the presentations that I did was on how to speak to people in secular campus. And part of it, something that I mentioned, is that we, all of us, lost the art of becoming friends, making new friendship. We are so isolated, and it's, I cannot even say in our advented bubble, because sometimes we're not even in that. We are literally isolating ourselves with our own boundaries. We come to the church, we walk in, we walk out. We go to class, we walk in, we walk out. So, like it's hard for us even to make friends, much less be able to build this relationship that people will be able to trust us, to listen to us. Xavier, you're muted.
6 years in, and you think I'd have figured this out. No, just about. I know earlier I was like, I didn't mean to like bemoan like public education. Like I'm a product of it, and I think I turned out okay. But I would say like part of, I would say a blessing of being in public education is that much earlier on, you have to learn how to engage with a majority of people who do not share your same value system, or base like default setting of culturally we're Adventists. Like when you're kind of like out there from an early age, you're just like, oh, I'm the odd one out who can't go to the school event that's on a Saturday, this like, and in those earlier days, like I think it's critical. I'm not a parent, let me preface that. But it's critical to like really not go performative mode, but to show your children like the joy of resting in the Lord and reconnecting with him in the Sabbath. Because super early on, if it just becomes a day of like, mm, your feet waded into the water on the Sabbath, like you hear these stories that are not too many generations removed from us of like, oh, we weren't allowed to, like it become like I've heard some about like we could go to the beach and walk on Sabbath, but we weren't allowed to go in the water. And it becomes like the 613 laws that the Jews were keeping of like, here's like it gets to that level of trivial nature of like, this is what keeping the Sabbath looks like for a good Adventist. And if you do one of these, and Lord forbid you witness to somebody and your foot touches the water, you've sinned. And it's like, oh my gosh. Um, so I would just say, yeah, it's an art form that we need to become better acquainted with. I think there's also this idea that like it's always going to be on our turf that the deepest like pointing somebody to a closer walk with God conversations are going to happen with. Like those are only going to happen at the evangelistic series that we have at the church. And it's like some will for sure, but a lot of them are going to happen when we engage with somebody where they're at. Like they intentionally or implicitly express, like, I'm uncomfortable in a church building setting. But I am very curious about like your spirituality. I see something different in you at work. Like when our manager is acting like I insert your colorful metaphor here, you're not cursing them out in the break room. You're in fact like saying, guys, let's pray for them. Because obviously something is, weighing on them and it looks like they're projecting on us or lashing out on us. Um, so yeah, all that just to say it's like seek if like you sense in your own life like you're like using the Sabbath or religion as justification to not engage with your fellow man, then that's not Christian at all. Like that's almost Satan weaponizing the gospel and being like, yeah, don't talk to anybody. Don't show the love of God to anybody.
I'm going to tell you guys that unfortunately, I believe that I was going to say two of my kids, but I can't even say all three of my kids are not in church today because of how hard I made Sabbath for them. Unfortunately, my first few years in the church, I didn't know how to separate things, and I became extreme with them. And Sabbath was a burden. Sabbath wasn't a joyful moment. I remember when I moved from Florida to Michigan to go to Andrews, and one of the first Sabbaths that I'm there, a group of professors and their children, everybody went to the beach, the lake, um, and they were playing with the ball, they were eating, they were doing a picnic. Some of the kids were in the water, which I don't care if I can or not go in the water. I am not going to that water. That thing freezes even in the middle of the summer. But anyways, the point is, when I looked at that, I felt so guilty. I thought that was so wrong because that's what I was taught when I first became a Christian. So looking at that, I felt so guilty. And I look at the girl that she was a student with me there, and I was like, but I feel like this is so wrong. This is not really keeping the Sabbath holy. We had gone to the church, we had potluck, and then we went to the like the end of the Sabbath, and we were going to do sound down worship there. And she goes, the best memories that I have from my childhood was going to picnic in places like this with my family. And today, when I look back, what I see is this: her family loves Christ, they're still in church, they keep the Sabbath in that style for since she was a little child, and my children are all out of the church. So when I looked at this, I'm like, I believe I did wrong. And it pains me, and I like to recognize what I did wrong. I'm not beating myself up anymore. They are adults, they can make choices. But I think it's important for us to know when when we're doing what Xavier just mentioned, we are making rules on top of the Sabbath that is not there. It's our interpretation. And then we make rules on top of rules, make the Sabbath a burden, and then we push people away from God. Now, if you feel the Holy Spirit is telling you not to do something, listen to the Holy Spirit, don't listen to me. But be careful not to judge something and push people away. Friends, it's 4:34. It is definitely time for us to end. I love this conversation. We will meet again next week at a regular time, 4 p.m. I'll be back in Charlotte and not get you guys all confused with the time. And next week, I'm going to give you hell. I love doing that. No, it's what happens after death. But anyways, thank you guys so much. Love having you, loving having this conversation. I'm looking for people to be in the panel next week. So if you like to be in the panel, send me a text. And I see you then. Thank you all so much.